What are the best kept secrets in the watch industry? Which is to say, what brands and watches fly under the radar and don't seem to get the attention that they deserve. I'd point to a brand like Sinn, a brand that has a ton of respect within the watch community, but due to their industrial, no-nonsense design language and their limited US distribution, has really led them to not quite breaking into the mainstream quite yet. Another hidden gem is arguably the entire vintage Movado catalog. Movado, from their inception to roughly the 1970s, made some really outstanding watches. I'm talking about solid gold cases and high-end movements. But it seems the market for vintage Movado pieces is being devalued and weighed down by the current offerings of the brand. Movado is a shell of their former glory, and despite trying to change that with new reissues like the Movado Kingmatic, the vintage market itself still has a ton of hidden gems and is a really great kept secret for most of the watch community. I would even throw in a third name like Doxa, a brand that has real historical credibility when it comes to creating dive tools, a brand that is still independent to this day and still making great watches, but doesn't seem to get the recognition that they deserve. But when you think about the entire Swiss watch industry today, I would argue that the brand and the watch I'd like to talk about in today's video is one of the biggest hidden gems out there. A brand that is arguably one of the least talked about larger Swiss brands that exist, and easily the least talked about within the Swatch Group, and their signature watch being a really cool vintage-inspired offering. And so without further ado, today I'd like to talk about Rado and their Captain Cook. Okay, so let's do a very quick speedrun on the history of Rado to see if we can figure out how they became one of the best kept secrets in the watch industry today. By no means is Rado a new brand. They started in 1917 in Legnau, Switzerland, and started as a movement manufacturer called Schlepp & Co. In fact, the Rado name didn't show up on watches until roughly the 1950s. And unlike a lot of Swiss brands, Rado's identity has been very much tied to material science, which all culminated in 1962 with the release of the Rado Diastar. This was marketed as the world's first scratch-proof watch, and coincidentally, in that same year of 1962, Rado also released their first Captain Cook, but we'll talk about that watch in a moment. On the corporate side of things, Rado by the early 1970s was a part of ASUAG, which was one of the world's first larger Swiss watch conglomerates. And in 1983, during the quartz crisis, ASUAG would merge with SSIH, which was the parent company of Omega and Tissot, to form SMH. And in 1998, they would rebrand as the Swatch Group, which really brings us to where we know Rado and the Swatch Group today. So for quite some time now, Rado has been associated with the Swatch Group and with some of the largest Swiss watch brands in the industry today, and yet for some reason they've received very little attention compared to their sister brands like Omega and Longines. And to take you back to 1962, if you remember, that was the year that they released the first Captain Cook, their signature dive watch, which is the watch we're going to talk about in today's video. And of course, the Captain Cook is named after Captain James Cook, an 18th century British explorer. And the first iteration of the Captain Cook came out at a time that could arguably be known as the golden age of the dive watch. Watches like the Rolex Submariner and the Omega Seamaster were still pretty new on the scene. And the Rado Captain Cook had its own distinct look. The beads of rice bracelet, the concave bezel, the rotating anchor logo, all of it made it a pretty unique offering. But despite that, the original Captain Cook line only ran from 1962 to 1968. So for almost 50 years, the Captain Cook sat within the Rado archives, but that all changed in 2017. At Baselworld of that same year, Rado reintroduced to the world the Captain Cook, reissuing a faithful 37mm size, but also coming out with a new 45mm size. It became an unexpected hit, and Rado has been expanding the Captain Cook lineup ever since, and today you can find it in that 37mm size, but also in 39, 42, and 43mm. The example I have with me today is the 39mm case size, which I think is a perfect size for competing with other vintage-inspired dive watches like the Tudor Black Bay and the Longines Legend Diver. As a quick disclaimer, Rado did send this watch in for review, but I am sending it back and they have no influence on this video. Nonetheless, I'm very grateful to get hands-on and review this watch. We're going to jump into the stats and specifications of this hidden gem, but do stay tuned for a few gripes that I have at the end because this watch isn't perfect. Okay, so let's jump into some of the general details about this watch, starting with the retail price. Now, the version that I have with me today retails for $2,650 US on a bracelet, although the versions of this watch in 37, 42, and 43 millimeters all come in at roughly the same price point. And again, this is the 39 millimeter version of this watch, which is actually a pretty new addition to the catalog, joining it in 2025. For me, this is pretty much the perfect size to fit most wrists out there. And the rest of the dimensions lend itself to that idea very well. It features a 12 millimeter thick case, a lug-to-lug distance of 45.5 millimeters, and has a 20 millimeter lug width. And it all looks very wearable on my 6.5 inch wrist. The case features a high polish all the way around and is paired with a unidirectional concave dive bezel with a ceramic insert with white superluminova markers. The crystal is a boxed-shaped sapphire with anti-reflective coating on both sides. This is a nice deliberate nod to the original acrylic crystal found on the 1962 model. And of course, on the screw-down crown, you'll find the Rado anchor logo. Of course, this watch comes in a variety of colors, but this particular example has a really nice green gradient dial and a matching dark green bezel. You'll notice the Rado logo at the 12 o'clock with the anchor that moves freely with gravity, which is a really cool, unique touch that you really don't find on any other watch. And at the 3 o'clock, you'll find a white date wheel with red text, which is a very unique aesthetic choice as well. The Broad Arrow handset features the same superluminova as the indices and the dive bezel, and I love that the dial is so simple, especially at the 6 o'clock, where it simply says Captain Cook, 300 meters, 1,000 feet. Equally as important as the aesthetics is, of course, the movement, and inside of this watch is the Rado R763 movement. Now, this is essentially a Rado branded version of the Powermatic 80, which is found in a ton of Swatch Group pieces, and that movement itself is based on the ETA C07.611. Now, one thing to note is that this particular movement does not have a synthetic or essentially a plastic escapement, which is one common gripe found with cheaper Swatch Group pieces like the Tissot PRX. And very similar to many other Powermatic 80 movements, this one features 25 jewels, a Nivachron hairspring for magnetic resistance, is regulated to 5 positions, and of course has an 80-hour power reserve. And last but not least, something that I'll talk about quite a bit when I talk about the issues with this watch is of course the bracelet. And this has the traditional beads of rice style bracelet that was found on the original 1962 version of this watch. And personally, I'm a sucker for a beads of rice style bracelet. I really do like the way it looks with this watch, but like I said, it will feature quite a bit in the gripe section in just a moment. I always try to be honest on this channel, and as much as I really do like this watch, I do have some major issues with it, especially at its retail price of $2,650 US, which is certainly a lot of money. And as mentioned, most of those issues stem from the aforementioned bracelet. First and foremost, the bracelet uses a pin and collar system to change the links. Now, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with using a pin and collar system to change the links, and I would even argue that pins and collars versus screws are equally secure for a bracelet. But at this price point, it seems almost customary to have screws to change the links. I personally start to expect screw links at around the $1,000 price point, so to pay $2,600 for a watch without it is a bit surprising. But okay, that might not be a huge deal, but these next two things about the bracelet are a huge deal in my opinion. Lesser so is the fact that number 2, this bracelet does not feature any on-the-fly adjustment. For a dive watch that touts itself as a daily piece, I really think it's a bit surprising that it doesn't have any on-the-fly adjustment, again, especially considering the price point. I mean, most dive watches have some kind of a dive extension at the very least, which isn't even very practical, but this watch doesn't have that either. But even worse than having no on-the-fly adjustment system is my third major gripe with the bracelet, and that is the fact that it doesn't have any micro adjustment. There is no way to get any fine precision with the measurements of this bracelet, and in fact there's no half links either, so it really is a guessing game to figure out whether or not this bracelet is going to fit well on your wrist. And as a certified bracelet lover, this is just a huge letdown for this watch because everything else about it is really great in my opinion. The only other gripe I would say I have with this watch is something that honestly you can't really hold against it, and that's the fact that it has a Powermatic 80 series of movement, which to me is just a little bit boring, but honestly is a decent movement, so I can't complain too much. I don't think anything I just mentioned should ruin this watch. It's still a very unique vintage-inspired dive watch offering from a Swiss brand that's been around for over 100 years, but at the same time, it is a bit disappointing. So back where we all started. Nothing about this watch, in my opinion, should be a secret. It comes from a major Swiss conglomerate brand, has some legitimate heritage, a unique look that is truly different from its contemporaries, and offers pretty solid value. And yet Rado and the Captain Cook are a brand and watch that don't seem to get mentioned that often. At the end of the day, the watch world is extremely expansive, and naturally, many brands and watches are going to be overlooked. And if you're asking me if Rado and the Captain Cook are the best kept secret in the watch industry, well, I think they make a legitimately strong case for it. It's one of the signature watches of one of the least talked about Swiss brands that again has legitimate heritage and does make a legitimately good product. And after spending some time with this piece, I would say that the general reception around the Rado Captain Cook is more of a shame than it is a reflection on the watch itself. Please let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Rado Captain Cook, and also please let me know what you think is the best hidden gem or the best kept secret in the watch industry today. I think this question can have a ton of answers, so I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. And again, thank you to Rado for the opportunity to get hands-on and review this watch. And if you enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you can give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.